Great. So I think it's almost time to start. In the meantime, while you're still settling in, I would love to hear where you're joining us from. So if you could just in the chat functionality put in the location you're joining from. Let's see where we're sending to today. We have Berlin, Cologne, Finland, Vienna, Hamburg, Serbia. Great. Madrid as well. A lot of Germany. Shanghai. Ooh, Montenegro. Very good. Perfect. So just to give you a small overview of how we're going to hold this webinar. So first there's going to be basically a talk from me, and afterwards you can ask questions in the Q&A section. And there is just one difference I wanted to point out. There's a chat where you just written in where you're from, basically. And then there is a Q&A section as well. And this is where we're going to have a look at and answer the questions that you have. So if while we're talking, you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A section. Or if you have a question regarding maybe the slides and all that, there is Teresa in the chat that will reply right away to you. So because the question already popped up, we are going to send out the recording of the session as well as the slides afterwards. All right, so we are at almost 70 people. Great to see. Let's start into our webinar then. So welcome to our webinar on OKRs and operative work. We are WorkPath, and this is a couple of simple words about us. We are a software company that is focused around creating outcome orientation, instating outcome management through the method of OKRs. And here you have a couple of our customers, our wall of fame, so to say. And yeah, just a small glance into our platform. We are way more than a platform, though. We are very proud of being having great partners in consulting, for instance, that help our customers do their transformation projects and be successful with them. And as well as a lot of enablement. Some of you might know me from the masterclasses, or I would have probably done as well a couple of the e-learnings that we have out there. And something we also pride ourselves with is our events and the community that we have established so far. If you have been part of the masterclass, you can look forward to another alumni coaching session that we're going to have soon, and also our online community that is going to be relaunched pretty soon as well. Very good. A couple of words to myself. My name is Alessia Fada. I am with WorkPath for a couple of years now, training and enabling our customers through trainings and coachings, and also creating together with our team e-learning content and everything you have seen around OKRs, probably on the website as well, together with, of course, the marketing colleagues and everybody else who's working towards enabling our customers as well as possible through the OKR method. Yes, a couple of questions up front. One I already asked where you're from. We already cleared that up. The second question will pop up on your screen now, which is, do you or does your company already work with OKRs? There's going to be a poll going up, and there we can see what the replies are. So we have a strong yes, a couple of no's, some that are not sure, and a couple of kind ofs as well. So very good to know that you have a lot of people who are actually working with OKRs. So this is always a great thing to have once you start into these topics. Second question: how would you rate your knowledge on OKRs? 1 is I don't know anything, and 10 is I feel like invented OKRs. So happy to see where your OKR knowledge is here as well. So we can kind of consider that as well in the presentation. So no 1 so far, that's good. No 10 so far as well. So everybody's kind of in the middle here. We have a couple of 6s, most 6s, 7s, and 5s. So it seems like a couple of you have already had your first steps with OKRs and are now getting into like the nitty-gritty questions. And the question of operative work and OKRs is one of these questions that you probably will encounter after your first or your second cycle. What are we going to talk about today? So one is the classic, those of you who actually have joined our webinars before, you know this part. We talk about why OKRs, why do we even do OKRs, what is the basics of that? And then we'll start into the topic of operative work and OKRs. And here we have one example that is in theory, the ideal scenario, so to say, and that we kind of like try to push for as well. That's kind of like the goal state that we have. However, sometimes it's not that easy. And we want to be very pragmatic about the question OKRs and operative work, because a lot of OKR systems have failed because they haven't really answered this question in a realistic way enough, right? So this is why we're going to go through 3 different scenarios about OKRs and operative work and the drawbacks and the advantages they have in practice. And since the answer, if somebody asks me, should I should I deal with operative work and OKRs? It's never easy to answer because it's very context dependent. So there won't be a definite answer from me today. But one thing I will give you is steering questions and how you can decide how to deal with OKRs and your operative work. And then lastly, we're going to have a Q&A section where you can basically ask all the questions that you still have around the OKR process and operative work. So basically, feel free to, while a question pop up in your head, to use the Q&A functionality next to the chat, so you can basically get all the questions answered afterwards. All right, let's start into the question, why OKRs? So in general, OKRs are a method that is widespread, of course, as you all know, because OKRs can bridge actually the strategy execution gap that is present in most organizations. Most organizations don't measure, don't really check if you have reached outcomes by the end, and rather measure outputs, for instance, so milestones and programs, and of course don't measure if they have actually achieved these values. So this is kind of a way of creating a new operating model to instill outcome-focused, metric-driven work, and to have like the teams more engaged about the goals that they set for themselves. The objective is, of course, the question, where do we want to go? And the key result, more or less, how do we measure if we have achieved these values, if we actually got there? Let's have a quick look at the OKR principles. So there is a couple of principles in the OKR framework that they can basically, that can be activated. The principles are at the same time the why of why are we doing OKRs, and at the same time also show you a kind of like a specific, let's say, practices that you can do to achieve these goals. We have a lot of them here. One is basically alignment. We will create alignment if we set our goals, and after that do alignment workshops, do alignment phases where we actually discuss how are we actually collaborating together, who's paying into whose goals, and how can we reach goals together that are coming from the top level, for instance. But also on the horizontal level, how are we on a horizontal level aligning and contributing to each other's value creation. Communication transparency is very important in OKRs as well, and it's something that they can achieve if everybody knows the strategy and knows how we can achieve it. That's a very empowering thing to do, and will foster, of course, the degree of strategy execution. If I know which goals I'm paying into and who else is doing other things, then I can probably have a more highly likelihood to achieve goals actually. Continuous learning, like every other agile method, it is based around that as well. So having retrospectives and learning from the actual process, but also in our way, how we actually execute a strategy. So this is a very important aspect there as well. Customer focus and continuous value creation. Most of you who have read our material know that we are very adamant about outcome focus and customer outcome focus. So a way that OKRs can do that is by raising the goal quality, for instance, by writing the customer itself into the OKRs. Engagement and team empowerment, there is a top-down and bottom-up dynamic with OKRs, where we activate the team's swarm intelligence to actually set the goals themselves without being cascaded down, which creates a lot of engagement and empowerment around these aligned and collective goals. Metric and data-driven decision-making, we don't only to collect data about the process with a tool like WorkPath, but we also measure if we have achieved outcomes, the outcomes that we have promised in the objectives. Purpose-driven work is more or less about the sensation that many people and big corporations have, which is less the problem that I don't really know how I'm contributing to the overall goals and what difference the work that I do, what impact do I have. That sometimes is not clear, and here OKRs can help as well. Focus is a big one as well. If everything is important, nothing is. And here we have a couple of things that in the OKR process that can help us focus on the right things. Yeah, so the two main ones are the last ones that we're going to focus on today. So operations, so the question if we have operative work in our OKRs or how we deal with that is kind of connecting the operative work to higher goals, which drives purpose. And at the same time, we have to balance focus, because if we write too many things in OKRs that are not strategic, we might lose focus on the strategic aspect. So this is something that we are just in general putting out there. These two principles also kind of like have a bit of friction between each other, which is basically what good values and good principles are supposed to do. All right, let's start into the topic. We have this ideal scenario that we want to start with, which is in theory how we would explain this dynamic between OKRs and operative work. One thing I still need to mention is the objectives and the key results, of course, there are unit that belong together, and these are the outcomes that we want to achieve. So we have promises that we're making in the objective, and so to say, we have values that we measure through the key results if we've actually achieved this. And of course, the initiatives is the usually operative work or the operational aspects that we do, the initiatives and the tasks that we kind of complete in order to achieve the key result. And that's kind of like the main connection between these two aspects. So having a look at the ideal scenario now in theory. We have in theory, if any OKR expert would ask you, what do you write OKRs about? It would be strategic topics, everything that is strategically relevant. If that is a team strategy or like a top level strategy, that doesn't really matter. Or if it's like a strategic improvement that you're making, these are things that could be in your OKRs and should be in your OKRs. So basically everything that is related to bigger strategies and bigger strategic artifacts on a team or a company level. The dynamic here is, of course, that we want to bridge the strategy execution gap through OKRs by doing execution work, contributing to the OKRs, and then contributing to the company strategy, which sometimes is also reflected in the KPIs and the high-level KPIs that we measure. On the other hand, we want to distinguish operative work. So everything that we do on a regular basis that is repeating, that is basically, there's different terms for it in different organizations, keeping lights on work, business as usual, and basically it's operative tasks that don't directly contribute to strategic goals. So basically it would be something that is more repetitive and not really that strategically focused. In the end, of course, everything that we do kind of like pays into the overall company strategy. So even if I don't really have, I don't know, an OKR about how fast I'm working off the tickets that I get, even if I don't put that into OKRs, it will still have an impact on the overall customer experience, and of course, thereby the success that we can have. So this is the ideal scenario. However, once we go into the deeper scenarios for the teams, it looks a bit different. So this ideal scenario can be applied in only one of the three scenarios that I brought to you today. So if you remember the color coding, here we have the execution work, everything that's strategically relevant, and here we have operative work. We have three different scenarios, which roughly depict three different types of work as well. This could be, for instance, a product team that works more strategically, and on the other end of the spectrum, you might have a customer service team that rather works very operatively and needs to maybe have a more of a look at what they actually write OKRs about. There is an inherent split in your work that is probably just the way as it's designed. However, thinking about these things with OKRs as where the execution work is located, can help you to kind of reflect on A, which of these scenarios am I in? And B, should I be in these scenarios? Or is that something that I want should have differently? Something that we always get is when we start working with OKRs, we don't want it to be on top work, right? It should be something that we don't do on top of things, but more something that kind of like more focuses the work that we already do in a more strategic way. So when we start with companies that say we have 140% operative work, then we kind of like have to go into this with our customers and understand, is that supposed to be this way? Is that really this way? Or can we kind of like categorize you in one of these scenarios and through OKRs actually help you focus your work more? What can you like leave? What cannot do instead? So this is the three scenarios. As I said, this is more like the strategically working product teams maybe, and this is more the other bookend of the operative focus scenario, so to say. And of course, you have everything in between. And even though it's not possible to kind of like vouch that either of the recommendations I'm going to give you is the right thing for you exactly, you kind of have to like take everything I give you, every best practice, and kind of like try to apply it in your own context. I can give you some small recommendations on at least how to deal with the questions. What should I even write my OKRs about? Because one thing that we have to learn is not everything needs to be in OKRs. If we write OKRs about everything, but our goal, the principle we're operating under is to focus, that's kind of contradicting each other. So have a look at which scenario you're in and maybe follow up with questions if you have any more in the Q&A section. So basically, let's have a look at the first one. So the first one is pretty straightforward. We have execution work. We just have to kind of like for us define what is actually counts under execution work and what is the operative task that we kind of like have to do repeatedly and what qualifies as what for us as a team. And this is, by the way, also something that should be decided on team basis because the teams know best how they work. Of course, involved with like the leaders of that team, that is, of course, the case as well. So here we have one scenario where there's more execution work, pretty straightforward. I would recommend to only write OKRs about the strategically relevant topics because that is not an important enough, so to say, part of your work that should be represented in OKRs. Again, remember, not everything has to be in OKRs. Let's think about what is strategically relevant in this case. And of course, also ensure focus. Like if this is work that we do and it's represented in like 7 different topics we have in our OKRs, then probably we should reduce that a bit. So here, again, applying focus, the principle of focus, and getting only the 3 to 5 OKRs, as probably most of you know, is best practice. OKRs probably will be relevant, very relevant for these teams, so we don't really have to worry about relevance here. And of course, we have to make sure that there's an evenly distributed capacity on the OKRs from this big chunk of execution work that we're planning on doing. So that one is pretty straightforward. After that, it gets a bit more murky, so to say, and you kind of have to apply this more to your own context and think about what's best for your team. So if we have teams that have an equal split between execution work and operative work, we have the challenge that, of course, the teams probably have 2 different systems where they have to look into. So a pro of actually putting the rest of your work that you do is that you have a single source of truth. So if you put both aspects, so to say, in OKR. Of course, what we do here and why we write OKRs is that usually the operative work, it's not a problem to focus on that because that's the recurring stuff. We want to kind of like focus more on the execution aspects that are a bit more, let's say, hard to keep track of and to actually think about in our check-ins, in our OKR check-ins. Are we actually spending enough time on the strategic things? So the important and urgent things, and not only about the urgent things in the operative section. So a benefit of actually putting everything into OKRs would be one single source of truth. But in my opinion, it is outweighed by the negative effects, which means we would have a lot of OKRs. So a lot of metrics that we use for assessing if you're focusing enough is the amount of OKRs that each team has. And probably also a correlation between the strategy execution degree, so the degree to which you have achieved OKRs, and how many OKRs you have. Because if both are kind of like down, if you have 10 OKRs and all are just like fulfilled by 30%, it speaks a clear language that you should focus more. And of course, you might lose the strategic focus in these cases, and it might also water down OKRs as the strategy execution tool. So that could be a consequence of that. And also it can be that if you track operative work somewhere else, then it might seem as double work for these teams. So watch out, what does the team currently use? And if you decide to do this, if you, after careful reflection, think we should put everything in OKRs, monitor these things in your retrospectives and see if there is a reason maybe to drop the operative work from your OKRs. So each decision that you take, kind of like revise that or like review that in the retrospective and see if that was the right one. One best practice one of our partners, for instance, does is that they have a lot of teams that want to do this and it's their choice, right? So what we do there is if you decide to put everything in OKRs, have like execution OKRs and operative OKRs. So basically just saying execution : and then your objective, and the same thing for the operative work. So that could be done, but again, consider the negative aspects of this. Now, moving on to the more tricky part of this. So basically, what do I do if I have mostly operative work? Do I write OKRs about that as well, or just a small portion that might be, I don't know, if I own a ticketing system and these are the tickets, this could be the improvement that I want to make in terms of how can I reach a higher throughput of tickets, for instance. So this could be like an OKR that I write about this topic that helps to reduce the operative work maybe, or like helps to improve the work that we do here. So in this scenario, if I have more operative work than execution work, if you are the person implementing OKRs, you have to think of, do we want them to do this by force, so to say? Like, do we want to make OKRs relevant here? If so, we need to loosen up a bit a rule of only writing OKRs about strategic topics, with having the benefit of then having these teams actually represented in OKRs. What I see sometimes is that I have teams that work very operatively, they're in accounting or like legal, and they at the beginning think OKRs are not for them, but then they kind of feel excluded as well. So this is something you have to think about, linking back to the principle of the sense of purpose, right? If I want to know how I'm contributing to the value creation of the others, then I probably need to be in OKRs as well. So kind of like weigh this a bit. Do you want them to be more relevant? And if yes, that could be a rule that you enforce. On the other hand, OKRs should work for the teams as well. So it shouldn't just be, let's say, work that we do that it is purely administrative. It needs to create value for the teams. So have kind of like the balance between mandating rules from the top, so to say, as a program lead, for instance, like the person that is responsible for the OKR introduction, and the other flip side of what works for the teams. And of course, if they write OKRs about operative things, then OKRs will be more relevant. However, if we do that, we have to weigh a couple of pros and cons here as well. So these, you can see that from the last slide, is that it has expanded a lot. This is a bit more complex of a situation. And also it's very hard for me always on the fly to give a recommendation about this. There's a lot of things we have to consider. So let's start with the advantages of putting operative and strategic work. So everything we see here, the entire pie, so to say, in OKRs. Advantage, again, single source of truth. We don't have to open two systems. We don't have to open in our check-ins two different tools to check this. That's one advantage. Something that is equally important is the perception that the work that these teams do, the work that these teams actually create, the value that they create is actually connected to everything else. So they feel equally as valued. Sometimes if we exclude these teams from OKRs because we stick too much to our rule, no operative work in OKRs, we kind of like reduce them to just having maybe one OKRs, which makes them feel less relevant. And this is something we have to check for, of course. And supporting functions as well have the tendency to think that they're not at all like involved in strategic processes, or don't really count, because the work is very keeping the machine oiled, right? Giving them a platform to actually showcase the value that they create can be a benefit there as well. OKRs will also become more relevant. I mean, that's something that we have established before as well. And also, if you foster OKRs with these teams, they might try harder to find these gold nuggets that could be strategic improvements of my operative work. So this can also be an advantage to leverage here. So if they think I don't have any, I only do 140% operative work, I don't have any strategic improvements that I could do, then that's exactly what the mindset will be. And they would kind of like fall off the wagon a bit more. And of course, I would have less overhead because I steer my operative work with OKRs as well. However, all of this, the flip side of it is, again, a lot of OKRs. You will have maybe teams that think that actually everything needs to be in OKRs. And you probably also have the mindset kind of like flow over from these teams to the teams that actually belong in the other categories. So if you allow this for one team, you always have to argue, why should like a product team not put everything into their OKRs that they actually do? So this is something you have to be mindful of as well, that you have to have good reasons why you allow people to write operative work in your OKRs. Again, this might be the case that OKRs are not seen as a strategy execution tool, that is seen as like double work, just administrative things that you do. And again, watch out where you track the operative work usually, and think of, is that more valuable to just have a look at, I don't know, my Jira tickets at the same time in the check-in as I have a look at my OKRs, where I see if I have made the strategic improvement that I was aiming for. Maybe that is the better solution in that case. Something that's also a danger is that OKRs become evergreens that are not reflected on, and that seldom represent the changes that should be done as well. So just copy pasting OKRs from one cycle to the next, if that becomes a best practice, again, it can impact the other teams that shouldn't do that because they're not working in this model. So think about how much you want to loosen up the rules of your OKR playbook, and how much you would kind of like lose on the other hand. And of course, there will be less distinction made between execution and operative work. And this to me is a crucial thing, because I actually want to push everybody to think about these things. Are you actually spending the time in the way that you should? And that's also what let's say the one aspect of our tool is helpful with. You don't need our tool. You can do this in a smaller team as well, with an Excel sheet, whatever. But for us, it proved to be very helpful to help the teams that we work with achieve a higher degree of strategy execution, because they have asked themselves, they're actually actively pushed to ask themselves through our tool, are you spending the time? How do you plan on spending your time? And in the middle of the cycle as well, in your check-ins, are you spending it the way you planned it to? Because that is something that is crucial in the OKR process, and is usually one of the biggest gaps, so to say, that we have in terms of let's say reasons why OKRs are not achieved well. So one thing you can do, we also have a capacity planning canvas on our website that you can use. Think about all the how much time you have in a cycle. Think about how are you planning to spend this, linking back to the 3 scenarios. What is the ideal state? And then even kind of like subtract the basically the time that you already know that you're going to spend otherwise. So buffers for vacation or like operative work. And that will then tell you how much time you have for OKRs even, and how much time do you have also for collaboration. So this is something that we want to push our customers further to. Actually, it's not about having the perfect objectively measured capacity planning. That's not what this is about. It's more like having a rough estimate of how much operative work do I plan to do, how much strategic work, and how much do I plan on collaborating with other teams on their goals. So this is how I can also make better commitments to the people that I try to work with, and they're kind of like needing something from me. So much about capacity planning. Having a quick look at what would happen if you know what your work split is of strategic and operative work, and how you want to deal with this in OKRs, and see kind of like do actually capacity planning on this. The effect could be that all these things that you see here on the screen are no longer such big of an issue. Most retrospectives that I'm in, all of these, most of these questions are actually pulled up because or most of these struggles are actually mentioned. So one is I didn't have enough time to work on my OKRs because we probably didn't plan realistically. Operative work just took over. I wasn't able to focus. If you, during a check-in, have a look at your chart and have a look at your, maybe do like a second estimation, you could actually be more realistic on how you're working right now. There was so much ad hoc work pushed on us. Very valid reason, happens a lot. If you do capacity planning and if you split your operative and strategic work in a way and segment it, the important thing here is that you can actually reprioritize. You can go to the person that is pushing something on you and say, look, this is the finite pie of time that I planned for my cycle. What do I not do now? Because I can't make up more time. I cannot go on to the 110%. Let's talk about how we need to spend time differently right now. The same thing is true for, we didn't know how much work to focus on which one of the OKRs. This is also done through capacity planning and actually knowing how much time you have in general for OKRs. Then you can also do a split and say like, well, let's split like our work equally depending on how much work lies behind that, right? So this is also a problem that will be solved if you have clarity on these splits that you have. We aligned on this, but we didn't know how much work this was. This is going to be something very important as well. If you don't know how much time you have to spend on strategic topics and collaboration, what exactly, how can you really make a commitment to another team that you're going to support them? And of course, at the later stage, we were trying to do too many things at the same time we couldn't plan for. This will help you focus. Focus on A, the right things in your planning or your drafting, and B, focus in the check-ins of actually checking back and seeing, are we spending the time the way that we intended to? And we don't know why, but we're not improving and reaching our goals in time. That is also something that I already mentioned. If you think about the splits, how much time you even have, you won't get inundated by the operational work because you know how to account for this. So this is a very important thing to reflect on, and that needs to be, is a great success factor in my book with the teams that I've been working with. So much about the benefits of actually capacity planning and knowing your operative versus strategic split. Let's move now to a more practical aspect. And again, I mentioned we'll get the slides later. One thing that I want to stress is, well, you need to decide how to deal with these aspects as a coach. From team to team, it might be different, right? We have different scenarios you operate in. So you have to kind of like deal with operative work maybe a bit differently. Plus you have to formulate an opinion on like with the person, for us, it's the program lead, the person who's actually conducting the OKR introduction and is responsible for all the rules that we bring into the organization with OKRs. So you probably need to form an opinion, a collective opinion about how to deal with this in general, but then also kind of like leave some leeway for the teams to decide differently. I'm going to give you an example of how I have done this before. So what I usually do is when I go into to work with the team, I actually have one question is, do we even have a clarity of what is operative, what's strategic work? That is the most important aspect. So the first slide, the split. Then which scenario do I actually fall into? So how does the split actually of these types works for us? Is that how it's supposed to be, or do we need to change this and maybe use OKRs to actually strategically focus a bit better? Then looking at the recommendations of each scenarios and how you have to make assumptions at this point, what would work best for you? So look at your scenario, look at the slides and the pros and cons, consider the field you're operating in, the way that you work and your culture in general, and make an assumption what would work and which split you should work with, and what of that split you should write actually in OKRs, or if you should leave it separately as the theory suggests. And then plan your capacity accordingly. That's a very big thing that you should do because of all the reasons that I already mentioned, right? So, and then I think one thing you have to be aware of is like you have a risk in every approach, in almost every approach, except for the first one, right? The thing you have to do is like through capacity planning and through the check-ins, check if you are actually decided the right way, right? And also conduct a retrospective at the end of the cycle and change your approach if you feel like this is not working. This is crucial, right? We're choosing something, we're making an assumption about how could this work for our team. We need to have a look back as well and see how we can actually, if there's a way to change this, or if this actually is working as designed for us. Just giving you an example, I was working with a legal department, and they, in the beginning, were very set on, we want to write OKRs. This is super important for us. We want to be part of the cool new method as well, which is culturally important for them. Very good. We started writing OKRs for them, but over the cycles, we realized it's always kind of the same narrative and the same things that we're trying to do there. So it's basically a lot of evergreens. And then the team had two different decisions to make. One, do we still write OKRs? In the sense of, do we have these evergreen OKRs that we pull from one cycle to the next? Does that provide more value? Or do we stop writing OKRs, but still participate in the process? They chose the second option. They said, we'll stop writing OKRs because we basically do the same things over and over again. We might have a strategic improvement OKR from time to time, but that's not very common. They said, like, every third cycle, we want to have a look at if there's something strategically to improve. But other than that, we want to just participate in like alignment workshops, or like be available for the drafting if there's some legal issues that needs to be discussed. So there's a lot of degree of involvement for teams that even decide only to write OKRs if there's a strategic improvement. So that's just something you need to keep in mind. And we discovered that through retrospectives, right? We had a look at how they're working right now, what the struggles are right now, and created a way and approach for them that work best. All right, so much for the steering questions that we have. Let's have a look at your questions. I'm going to start with the Q&A section. There's a lot of questions in this chat as well. I will move to that afterwards. And let's have a, so Matthias asked the question, how do you structure the check-in sessions with your employees? What are the common questions to ask? So in general, the teams should, the check-in should be integrated in what you already do. So basically, is there a team meeting where you discuss the output that you're providing? Is there a meeting where you have a look at your backlogs? For Scrum teams, for instance, is there like a sprint review that you could integrate an OKR check-in into? That's the most important thing. It shouldn't be on top. It can be on top if the team decides that that's the right way to do it. That's the first thing you need to check. The things that you would actually want to do is understand, what have we done so far? What's the output that we have done? And how did this impact the outcomes? So have a look at what have you done, and also with the effect that you had on OKRs. And here it could be helpful to go through the key results and have the owners of the key results actually present how did I actually contribute to the value that I'm promising in the objective? And can we move the key result? Yes or no? And if we can't move the key result, the question is our confidence level still at the right point, right? The confidence level, we start at 10, if we're very confident that we're going to achieve it, and we'll lower it the more we progress in the cycle, and the less confident we get that we're going to reach this by 100%. So either update the OKR or set the confidence level lower in that sense. And of course, have a look at what have we done? What are we doing next in other blockers? These are like the most common questions about this. All right, how would you distinguish between retrospective meetings and check-ins? So actually, like, check-ins could be seen as like very small retrospectives that happen throughout the cycle, every 1 or 2 weeks, depending on what's best for your team and what team meetings you're already holding, right? And the retrospective in the end is kind of like having a look at everything that we have done in terms of the process, not the content of the goals, but the process, and actually having also next steps deduced for that. That is very important to have there. So basically, retrospectives is looking at the entire cycle, and the check-ins are more like, let's check in on our goals, how they're progressing, and can we actually change things? Usually we can't really change something if we are doing the retrospective, because the cycle will probably be almost over. All right, what should we consider as a base starting point for planning in the planning session for both operational teams and the executive team? What difference are there in the planning session based on the team? So in the end, the planning, so the drafting sessions shouldn't be that differently. The amount, so basically what you have to decide on are exactly the questions that I posed before. So which category do you fall into? How many OKRs can you write based on the capacity that you have? These are the important things that you have to ask for both, so to say. The split between operative and execution work is usually more relevant for the team level instead of like the management level above that, because the teams usually are the ones who have most operative and keeping the lights on work. If you have teams or like if you have managers that also work in maybe like a second hierarchy level as well on like projects with like sub teams or like a task force, then this aspect is also relevant. But the split of operative and execution work is usually more a question that a team would ask that actually executes OKRs. Like does the work behind that as well. All right, so John Durr uses the check-ins for continuous performance management on a personal one-on-one level. What's your opinion on that? So my opinion differs oftentimes from what John Durr says. For instance, let's say there's a lot of things that just for us in our philosophy is a bit different. I personally would not use OKRs on a personal level, which then also would exclude them from performance management. Because what would I, and also like would not be like a one-on-one meeting. I would do team check-ins and team OKRs, because what happens if you have individual OKRs, you will have a lot of them. We have SAP is one of our customers, and if they would have OKRs for every single of their several 100,000 people, that wouldn't work. That would be too much administrative work. And so this is one of the reasons why I would go to team OKRs and not personal OKRs. The same reason is true as well if you want to empower people, if you want to have them to set their own goals. Performance management is often either tied to bonus or like a performance evaluation. And here I would always suggest to keep that separate, because if I can set the goals that I'm being measured on myself, I would always choose a lower goal, which is not kind of like in the spirit of OKR. As well, there's a lot of let's say drawbacks of tying compensation to the goals to OKRs. So we have another webinar for that as well that we may be able to share later as well. So yeah, that's just something that I would kind of like steer clear from, because A, we want to remain on the team level, and B, we should separate as much as possible performance management from OKRs, even if sometimes there's like small interlinkages that, I don't know, include a 0.1% of OKR achievement to performance management. That is something that I could live with, for instance, but in general, I would keep this a bit separate. All right, thanks for your questions, Matthias. Leonard, what are common situations, red flags, where you would avoid implementing OKRs in an organization or team? So I would say OKRs can be beneficial for every single team and every single organization. However, there are certain success factors. One is leadership buy-in. If leadership is not on board, you probably won't change the way they give out, they give instructions and they give goals and they manage top down. This is probably something that won't change. There needs to be some willingness of change in the organization. Another success factor is active change management. If you have nobody who actually owns this topic and does the change management and has maybe even a crowd of coaches, a community behind them that help them to kind of like be the longer arm of the program lead, how we call them, that would also be something that I would advise against if you don't have that, or I would fight for it very much. Another thing is that enablement. If the company does not want to invest in enabling people, in A, knowing why they need to do something differently, and B, also how and the what, that is something that I would also see as a success factor for an OKR process. So one of the most common misconceptions about OKRs is that it does not, let's say, it does not swallow any money. We can just do a little OKRs. That is simply not true. You will have to invest some human resources and maybe also some resources and training to actually achieve this. And there needs to be a willingness to do that as well. And of course, you need a clear why. Why are we doing this? The principal slide that you've seen before, that's the slide we show, we go through with all of our customers before we start working with them. We don't implement OKRs just to implement OKRs. Have a clear reason why you're doing this and what you're trying to solve. So that's also a recommendation from our side. All right, for scenario 3, could you explain again how to use OKRs for mostly operative teams, and what does capacity planning look like? So for operative teams, you have a couple of options. One is, let me go back on my slides for this. One is you only write OKRs about these topics, so the strategically relevant things. So basically, it could be that it is relevant for your own team strategy. It doesn't need to be like linked to everything that is above you, but this could be the logic that you have, I don't know, a customer service team that is implementing a chatbot and measures the success of the chatbot with the execution work that they do here. This doesn't mean they put the number of calls in it or anything else. They probably have a different system to track that. So this is one option. Option 2 is to write everything in OKRs. So to have the number of calls, the length of the calls, the quality of the calls, all as OKRs, which means, however, that you would A, always have the same OKRs, and B, you will probably, as I said, lose kind of like the track. If you have like 5 operative OKRs and 1 strategic one that is actually a process improvement, you'll probably lose track of this one as well. The other option, as well as the legal team that I mentioned, is that you only write OKRs if there's a strategic improvement. That is only the case if you have like very, very few of those in a cycle. I would not do only OKRs about operative work, because that would defeat the purpose of being a strategy execution tool, right? So this is something, these are the kind of like the processes that you have to decide between. And yeah, capacity planning usually looks like this, more or less. We have the amount of numbers that the amount of full-time people that we have to spend as a team. So we actually know how many people we are and how much maybe full-time and part-time people we have. And there we would actually start estimating how are we planning to spend our time. I always start with the operative work because that's usually the blocker. So how much operative work, how much of our general time are we spending on operative work? And to move this kind of like this thingy here, you can basically aggregate the estimates of all the people present in a workshop, for instance. What I like to do is do basically capacity planning poker, almost like planning poker, but everybody gives an estimation of how much time the team in general spends on the full time, how many people spend on basically operative work of the total time that we have at our disposal. Then you would subtract buffers for everything you already know will swallow time away from strategic projects. For me, this is, for instance, the courses that I give. I give the master classes together with my team, and these are like 8 hours almost every week that we have to subtract from the general time we have to work on OKRs. What you're left with is the question, how much time do you have to spend on your team goals, and how much time do you have to spend on contributions that you give to others? So this is basically, it's not a scientifically validated, it doesn't have to be like per person, it just needs to be a rough estimate, a rough feeling of how, are we actually spending the time the way that that's realistic or not. So that's the difference that we have to make there. Yes, so much for capacity planning. I'm sorry. Next question. I've used ambitious OKRs for my personal targets, my decision, and track my bonus regularly. This works well as I do not have a personal bonus. Yes, of course, if this is kind of like tied, if you want to, like, I have also colleagues that do personal OKRs in their private life, right? Or like for their own development goals. That can be helpful because, I mean, OKRs again ask the question, what value do you want to create for yourself in this case, and how do you measure if you got there? That's not a bad thing. The question is just if it's tied to a personal bonus, then you have kind of like an incentivization problem here. Very good. So Miri has a question as well. Regarding your belief that individual OKRs lead to always lower goals to achieve is something that from personal experience, I don't agree with. I think the key is to empower and challenge individuals on their ambitions and development in form of coaching. Also, the overhead in maintaining individual OKRs, again, from my experience, is vastly different in that people generally enjoy taking ownership of their achievements. That might be true for some customers and for some organizations. We work with very, very big customers, and there is just the overhead that our program leads will have to deal with, and also the coaches would have to deal with, reviewing OKRs, reviewing quality of OKRs. That can be an overhead as well. And of course, in some cases, it might work to have individual OKRs. However, we always have to consider the drawbacks of having that. And that's the case for everything that I've shown you so far. These are best practices that we have validated and we are using like this within our customer projects on day-to-day basis. If there's something that in your specific case and the context does work better, that's what you should go with as well. Test everything that we tell you. If it doesn't work for your context, that's fine. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, because we're dealing with cultures and organizations and people, right? So that's always something we have to consider. All right, next one, Francisco. How much time do you spend on the capacity planning? Don't we have a risk of making this a heavy process? Yes, there is a risk. And that is why you have to have it in a very light way manner. So what I like to do is, if this is the risk, I actually just kind of like time box that a lot. So the thing that we do, for instance, internally at WorkPath as well, we kind of like everybody comes to the drafting session already with like a planned capacity that we have to spend on OKRs. This takes for me time to calculate is, I think that is maybe 5 minutes when I go into my calendar and see how many courses I already planned, to me, that is 5 minutes. I bring that to the overall estimation, and that to me should be a process that takes, in general, for the individual, maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So, but speaking of like the context, right? If you already know that if you bring this into your context, people will come up with like complex Excel sheets and are not comfortable with doing like the rough estimations. That is, of course, a risk that you have to mitigate at that point, in my opinion. But it's also, we are the people usually who design the processes or have influence on how to design this process. So I think that's just something we have to keep in mind. And as well, your customers are the people that you're introducing OKRs to. So include their feedback here and change the process as much as needed, so it's not as heavy. All right, thanks for your question. From Shanghai, OKR is effectively used by the Communist Party. In our company, we started from the bottom, but initiatives were not supported. In your experience, what should be the first step? So starting from the very bottom can have the exact effect that you kind of like that things don't match up. So one thing that should be done is every team, when they start drafting OKRs, they should have a look at what is kind of like the filter that we have to set for our own goals. And here again is the question, what kind of culture does your company have? So the question is always, do you have to take everything that is mandated from the top and put that into your own OKRs and kind of like measure the value of what you have done with your OKRs by filtering? Is that a mandate? If yes, then of course you have to ask the question, why are we doing OKRs? And is like the aspect of team empowerment not something we would want to achieve? I mean, we have the great late Steve Jobs that said, I don't hire smart people to tell them what to do, but for them to tell me what to do. And that's kind of like the spirit of OKRs. And if you want to instill that, that is definitely something that I would then try to change up a bit. Because what each team should do is of course, there's always a strategy that comes from the top. And then the team should apply their own filter and say, like, this is a team strategy aspect. This is a company strategy aspect. This is maybe like an internal improvement aspect that we need to cover as well. I'm thinking of like maintenance issues, for instance. We have to keep our system stable. So we need to focus an entire OKR cycle just on maintenance. And that should be possible for the teams to do, because we want them to as well feel heard, right? And not dictate to them what they should do, even though they know they should actually do something different to keep the company afloat. So to me, the first step is to, again, go back to the principles and have a look at what do we actually want to achieve with this. And if engagement and team empowerment is one of them, then probably we should have to like loosen up a bit the, basically the way we do OKRs in this sense. And it should start with some sort of guidance from the top, content-wise, and then every team should think, how can I contribute to this? How am I paying into this? Ideally, you have OKRs from the top, but you don't have to have them. So if you even have just rough KPIs that need to pay into, then you would just think, well, what value can I create, the objective, and how can I measure if I have achieved these promises, the key results, what value can I contribute to this value that is on top? So of course, there's a bigger benefit if the top level knows what OKRs are and are working with this. And that should be continuously worked on. However, if you want to start working on OKRs, it can also be done like bottom up, so to say, like with bottom up topics. All right, we have 2 minutes left. I'm not sure if there's any more questions. So most of you have put things in the chat. If you still have something that you want to have asked in just 2 minutes, please copy paste that into the Q&A section. I will go through some of the questions, but it doesn't seem to have much else here. Perfect. All right, I think that concludes the webinar for today. I hope you had some great insights, and please always give us feedback as well. You're going to get an email by my colleague after the session. And yeah, I enjoyed the exchange, even if it's not face-to-face in these webinars, but great that you all participated, and thanks a lot for your time.